Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha TV, where today we're taking a closer look at the developments in the Korean Peninsula. The US says it plans to activate a THAAD, a missile defense system, in South Korea within days and tighten economic sanctions against North Korea. Now, the THAAD system was originally not expected to be in use until late 2017, and now many South Koreans are opposing it, fearing that they may become a target. Meanwhile, North Korea has vowed to conduct more missile and nuclear tests, while China argues that THAAD will destabilize security in the region and is asking both sides, the US and North Korea, to practice restraint. India, on the other hand, has supported the sanctions imposed against North Korea and is going to put sanctions from its own side, as advised by the UN Security Council. Now, remember, this is the first time that India has taken such a major decision on sanctions against any country. So what does this mean? Is it time to choose sides? Are the US and North Korea on the brink of war, or is this mere brinkmanship? Joining us on the big picture today on the show, we have former Ambassador S.R. Tayal. He's the former Ambassador of the Republic of Korea. We have retired Commodore Uday C. Bhaskar joining us here, Director of Society for Policy Studies. Also, Sandeep Kumar Mishra is the Associate Professor with the Center for East Asian Studies at JNU. And Kama Raghav, who is the international affairs expert and also senior journalist, joining us here on the panel. Starting with you, Ambassador, sir. You know, every April, every year, we see US and South Korea military drills taking place. There are joint exercises that take place every year. What is different this time around? Is it the THAAD system that has changed the dimensions, or is it also North Korea perhaps pushing itself a little more stronger?
I think the basic issue is the nuclearization program of North Korea. Now one has to see what exactly is the objective of North Korea and what exactly is the concern of America. This North Korean nuclearization issue has been there since early 90s, and Clinton tried to deal with it. And it is very clear that North Korea wants to develop capacity to strike mainland United States. It wants to develop intercontinental ballistic missile capacity as well as miniaturization of the warhead. And it has been very consistent on that track. Whenever there is a lot of pressure, they retract, but they come back on the track. That is unstoppable. They will go on that track. What does United States want? They really, the red line for them, as President Trump said when he was a candidate, that North Korea cannot be allowed to develop this capacity to strike mainland United States during his watch. Now the time is, all the timelines say that by 2020 maybe North Korea will be able to have both the delivery capacity as well as the miniaturization of the weapon. So this is the background in which you have to see all that what is happening. Now for the last 20 years or less or more, North Korea has very successfully played United States, agreeing for something, then not doing it. And now the question is, what has China been doing? Has China been also playing United States and making a fool of them? Are they sincere in trying to control North Korea? And now, the way President Trump gave a warning to President Xi Jinping that in case China does not help, we'll go alone and try to do something. After return of Xi Jinping and Trump summit from Florida, Xi Jinping has spoken twice to President Trump.
Yes.
So President Trump has apparently made it clear that North Korea cannot be allowed to have this capacity to strike mainland United States. And I'll take you back to 1962, when President Kennedy at that time had laid this red line that Soviet Union cannot have nuclear weapons in Cuba. And they almost went to war, and Soviet Union had to withdraw. So I think President Trump will stand by his words, and China will have to squeeze North Korea. Otherwise, it can be disastrous, and ultimately, who will lose? It will be South Korea, our friend South Korea.
Absolutely. Interesting that you're bringing in the Cuban Missile Crisis to this and likening it perhaps to leading up to that situation. Commander Bhaskar, talking about just that, give us an idea of the strategic dimensions also being laid out, of course, by the ambassador. He's taken it, but if you could take it forward, you know, what does this particularly mean for the area?
You know, just to add, I think, to this larger framework that Ambassador Tayal has very lucidly given to us as the framework, if the United States is able to deploy the theater anti-missile system, the THAAD as it is called, in South Korea, to bolster South Korea's own defenses against a potential North Korean missile, in many ways it would change the entire strategic grid. Because if you see the statements that have come out from Beijing in a very, very clear way, and perhaps in a muted manner from Moscow, the positioning of an anti-missile defense system in South Korea, which is a military ally of the United States,
Yes.
would in a way degrade what you might call as the offensive nuclear weapon capability both of China and of Russia. So that creates an imbalance in the existing status quo as far as the nuclear weapon relationship is concerned between United States and Russia on one hand, United States and China's own anxiety that its relatively modest nuclear force
Yeah.
is in a way going to get stunted. So this is purely on the WMD dimension. But I think there is another strategic imperative which perhaps is driving Chinese anxiety at this moment, which is that if they are pushed to the wall, I think for them they see this as a binary choice, meaning that if they are not able to exert adequate pressure on North Korea, you will have the equivalent of a nuclearized North Korea, which in turn may possibly lead to a nuclearized Japan. So which means even the regional picture
Yes,
changes in a
yes.
very complex way.
Yes.
And the other extreme, we spoke about a binary. One is a nuclearized North Korea. If that exigency does not take place and they are able to in some manner lead to an implosion within the North Korean regime itself, whatever be the means, I don't think we need to speculate, then the possibility of a unified Korea
Yes.
is also something that would have to be factored into the calculation. And that again is not something that would be, shall we say, suitable
Yes.
even for a Tokyo, a Beijing, or perhaps even a Moscow.
Yes.
A unified Korea poses a completely different set of strategic kind of, shall we say, picture.
Yes.
So in that sense, I think there are many strategic undercurrents at play. Some which are purely technological, which have to do with,
Yes.
and some which are geopolitical. That if you alter the politics or the geography of the Korean Peninsula, I think we are going to have many complex permutations and combinations that would affect not just East Asia,
Yes.
but by extension, I would submit all of Asia.
Taking in fact that forward, Kamaraga, if I could come to you, taking that forward, that North Korea, of course, Kim Jong-un, he's unpredictable in a sense, he's of course taking all the risks possible, and he's not stopped at any kind of tests that have been conducted so far. He's of course not looking at the sanctions seriously. That aside, taking away from what Commodore Bhaskar said here, is he also playing into the instability that perhaps is at the moment in South Korea? There's no president there. The impeachment has taken place in about a few, about 10 or 11 days. We have the elections that are to take place for the new president. Looking at all of that, also relations between Japan, China, or for that matter, even South Korea, it remains fractious. Do you think, North Korea is just trying to play them in some way?
You're asking me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, there is a big problem, the whole of peninsula, as you mentioned, there's absence of leadership within South Korea. So I think this is the best time to deploy THAAD missiles, The American found it more convenient, This is the best time, because there were large number of South Korean were in fact opposed to deployment of these American missiles over there. And second thing, yes, problem is getting out of control. If Americans are basically too involved in Middle East. They don't want direct confrontation with the North Korean at this moment. So for them, the best thing, they are putting all their cards on China's leadership, hoping China to build enough pressure on North Korea to deter, or to not to deploy these missile systems, over there, or not to test these missiles. Besides this, they are putting pressure, basically putting more pressure on China than on North Korea. And second thing, their objective is to deploy maximum troops in that region. They're deploying maximum troops, a large number of troops in the peninsula, bringing their armada over there, deploying THAAD missile, which is creating imbalance between China, Russia, as Ambassador has just mentioned, or Ambassador Mr. Bhaskar has just mentioned. So these are the things, So it's a long drawn conflict which is
Yes.
continuing for the last 2 decades or 4 decades or 5 decades, will continue further, you know. Besides this, I don't think America would engage, you know, directly with the North Korea. So they are involved in Syria. They have just you know, dropped the bombs. Then they have bombed the Afghanistan. Their main interest at the moment is the forces are going to deploy more troops in West Asia. So their main concentration over there.
Okay.
So I think it will take time. You know, let's wait and see how the situation
All right.
develops. They are hoping China would contain.
Absolutely. And how much of a role, Sanjay, then China has, you know, in trying to calm things down? With the US, we know, of course, how things are, but at least when it comes to North Korea, how have the relations been? Can China actually talk it out? Can actually try to put some sense into Kim Jong-un, if at all that is going to be eventually the last resort for what the US is going to be waiting for? Can China have that influence over North Korea?
Definitely. Actually, China is going to be the most important player because
Okay.
the way they are going to deal with North Korea and the way they are going to negotiate with Americans, that's going to be the most important variable in this crisis. In my opinion, actually, other speakers, they talked about different dynamics. It seems to me that this year, the biggest change actually looks to be that after coming to power, Donald Trump had been trying to, trying to redraw the red line vis-a-vis North Korea. Earlier, whenever North Korean used to have missiles and nuclear tests, Americans usually through United Nations Security Council, they used to have economic sanctions and other,
Yes.
you can say. But after coming to power actually, and when he started looking at North Korean issue, he had a new policy in the sense that he said that we may have something called secondary sanctions. And then he also said that in case North Korea goes for nuclear and missile tests, we may go for preemptive strike. So that's a very, I think, difficult proposition, especially
Yes.
from North Korean perspective, because it means they are not going to allow, they are not allowed to have any nuclear missile tests. So he wanted to, you can say, redraw a line.
Yes.
And basically this contest, as you mentioned in the very introduction, that April every year, the North Korean side also lots of important dates are there.
That's right.
Yeah, and from South Korean side, South Korean American, they are having joint military exercises.
Yes.
It's a difficult, you can say, April every, that's why they call it April crisis. So it means every year it happens.
Yes.
Intensity may vary. This year the difference is that Donald Trump had been trying to redraw the line, and basically it's a tug of war between North Korea and United States, that whether North Koreans are going to accept that new red line or
Yes.
whether they are going to defy it. And in that, you can say, scenario, as you mentioned, that role of China is going to be very important.
Okay.
China is going to be important. You mentioned, I think, one thing which I would like to answer. You asked a previous question that what about North Koreans trying to have something in, like in South Korea, when internal
Yes,
some kind of
yes.
political instability is there. I will say that it's not, it has nothing to do with South
Okay.
Korea, because in case there are problems vis-a-vis North Korea, South Korean politics is going to be decided actually by, conservatives are going to be stronger.
Okay.
So North Korea would not like that South Korean politics is dominated by conservative candidates. So rather than actually having provocative action connected to South Korea, it should be connected to Donald Trump, who is
Okay.
trying to redraw the line.
Okay.
And basically North Koreans are not ready to accept that line. And China in between, they are, I think, still not very clear. The signals are very mixed. At one hand, they have been talking about, we can say, putting some sanction or
Yes.
North Korean coal export and oil and other things. At the other hand, actually, they stopped actually their flight, Air China to Pyongyang for 3 weeks. But next week they are going to restart it.
Yes.
So I think China is still not giving very clear
Signals as to
But
where
otherwise,
it stands.
I think in any scenario, I think the role of China will be very critical.
Okay, okay. Ambassador Dayal, you know, America says that it will not attack until Pyongyang gives us good reason to do so. What does this mean? And, you know, what is that limit? You know, because everyone's, of course, saying at the moment it seems just like a tug of war. Each leader is trying to test the other one and see how things go. Perhaps Kim Jong-un is trying to test, you know, to what limit can Trump actually accept his eccentricities, and vice versa perhaps there. But you know, when America says that, what does it really mean?
Really, the actions which provoke United States and the international community are these repeated tests, both nuclear tests and the intercontinental ballistic missile tests. Now everybody is expecting that the sixth nuclear test may happen any time because the site has been prepared. That will be a grave provocation.
Yes.
How United States will deal with it, only Trump knows. And the other thing is that intercontinental ballistic missile capacity, repeatedly North Korea has been testing and failing. But once it succeeds, that means United States becomes vulnerable. And in some way, it will not be another day for United States. They will have to retaliate. What form retaliation will take, what will be the ultimate consequences, because in the contestation is really between North Korea and United States. But the unfortunate pawn in this game is South Korea, because always North Korea threatens that it will rain fire and brimstone over Seoul and destroy. They will also be able to destroy American troops, whether in Guam, because they have at least 700, 800 kilometer or mile Nodong missiles and all that, perhaps nuclear armed. So the American troops in Okinawa, of course there are 28,000 American troops in South Korea itself.
Yes.
So it's a very high stakes game, and ultimately it is that how much pressure the United States is able to bring to bear on China. Trump has very clearly said if they deliver on Korea, we will make some concessions on trade.
Yes.
So contestation is between North Korea and United States, and cards are being played by China with United States.
Okay. Commander Bhaskar, do you agree with that? Is that what it's eventually turning out to be? And like I said, what is that limit?
What is that red line?
Yes, what's
will
that
it remain
red
a tug of war?
Yes.
I just want to add to the formulation given by Ambassador Tayal, which is that I think the United States has an inherent vulnerability when it comes to dealing with North Korea, and this has to do with the presence of American troops.
Okay.
Because we have seen repeatedly that every US president, when he's been confronted with this, they are reminded of the US experience in Afghanistan, which is, if you recall, post 9/11.
Yes.
One of the reasons why the United States has not been able to implement, what might be called as the preferred course of action vis-a-vis Pakistan is because the American troops were present in large numbers in Afghanistan till recently. And we know that the one occasion when America tried to take a tough line with Rawalpindi, the headquarters of the Pakistan Army, the entire supply line was blocked.
Okay.
And immediately the United States became more flexible in dealing with Pakistan's support of terror and so on. So I think that is something that every US president would have to factor in before converting the tug of war into any kind of a military action where ordnance could be exchanged. So I'd like to flag that. But I think the larger issue, Tracy, if I could also identify, is that for China, the dilemma is that they have the experience of having created a nuclear weapon state in Pakistan. And we know Pakistan's locus in this part of the world, the degree to which Pakistan is now engendering instability.
Yes.
Now, in like fashion, China has supported North Korea in its WMD, weapons of mass destruction endeavor. And there is a very complex linkage between North Korea, Pakistan, and China. And I think for the Chinese political leadership and for the Chinese strategic community,
Yes.
it is to what degree is North Korea going to listen to your overtures?
Yes.
So I think even this suggestion in some quarters that China holds the card and they can ultimately, use North Korea like the equivalent of a puppet
Yes.
may be misplaced, because I think North Korea in the last decade definitely has become aware that if you have nuclear weapons or you signal that you have nuclear weapons, the rest of the world is going to be
It
with you
listens
in
to
a
you
very, very
and
different
reacts.
way.
Yes, yes.
So I think this very uneasy tug of war will continue unless, as Ambassador Tayal said, if North Korea were to breach this nuclear test, I think then all bets are off.
Okay, okay.
That's the way I see
Sanjay,
it.
you'd like to respond to that?
I disagree actually with Commander Uday Bhaskar about this idea that China, because actually till now there is no record in public that China supported North Korean WMD. Actually, it's a very different game in East Asia, which China has been trying to play.
Okay.
China has been very careful in East Asia, because as he mentioned in his first presentation, I would agree to that part, because actually China is quite aware that a nuclear North Korea means there are all probability that Japan may think about going nuclear. There are every justification of tactical nuclear weapons reinstalled in South Korea. So they have never supported officially. That's what, there's no public, not a single, you can say, evidence that North Korea, WMD has been supported. You know, there's a very, from very beginning, if you look at North Korean political journey, you will realize that they have been a weak country, surrounded by actually big powers, but they have been able to play their cards very well. Even the two best allies of North Korea, USSR and China, they have been able to play between them. And whenever they had some problem with, suppose when in 1950 they wanted to have nuclear program, they went to China, China refused to do anything, they went to Russia, they got something from there, and they have been doing it for decades actually. So in my opinion, from Chinese perspective, they want North Korean survival. They want that North Korea as a buffer state must continue. But at the same time, they are not happy with a nuclear North Korea, or say a missile, everyday tests of nuclear and missile, can say, from North Korea, and very belligerent North Korea. Because basically, if North Korea becomes very hot, very belligerent, basically it's going to provide justification for Americans, Japanese and South Koreans to have all their modern weaponry in the regional, you can say. And ultimately, those weaponry, they are going to be problematic for China. So I think, but at this, so basically this distinction we need to remember that China, they support survival of North Korea and they are going to be there. At the same time, they don't want a belligerent North Korea or a North Korea having WMD, but they don't know what to do. They have also, there is a picture, there is an image in outside world that China has some leverage over North Korea. Even if that leverage is actually not there, China doesn't want to openly accept it. They have been trying to pretend as if they are having leverage over North Korea.
Okay. Kamaraga, do you agree with that? And also, you know, like Commodore Bhaskar says, if that nuclear test, of course, takes place, then all bets are off. But until then, do we see this shadow boxing continuing? Is this what we're going to be seeing from both sides?
Of course, that will continue for a longer period of time. But one thing, you know, neither Russia nor China or America, none of them would accept nuclear North Korea, because that would upset the whole balance in that region. So nobody is interested in that. All of them are putting pressure. They want, okay, fine, you know, confrontation to some extent, you know, which is manageable, continue, that's not a problem, you know. But having nuclear state, you know, emerging as a powerful state, you know, that would be a problem for all the states. Besides this, you know, the American policy is basically of that regime change. America now believes, you know, that policy of containment, not now, you know, in fact, from the time of George Bush, they believe, you know, policy of containment has failed, regime change, you know, and they, at that time it was said North Korea, Iraq and Iran part of axis of evil. But what was happened at that time, you know? The main concentration remained on Iraq and regime change in Iraq and Iran, not North Korea. North Korea was just mentioned. And this time also, I believe, you know, they would put more pressure on China to deal with North Korea, and Americans mainly would concentrate on West Asian region, you know. Besides this, you know, they are also having number of other things, you know, that like encouraging dissidents or encouraging, you know, internal opposition within the, and it looks there were some opposition, because the murder of his brother, step-brother, was one of the reasons, you know, he was assassinated or killed over there by the regime. So there are some signs of opposition emerging in that. The crack is there.
All right.
Tracy, may I come in on to respond to Professor
very
Mishra's
quickly,
observation? Very quickly, I just want to say, in the interest of time, that China has a fairly, I would say, rich track record of exporting weapons of mass destruction in Asia. WMD is both the delivery, the ballistic missile, and the nuclear weapon. It goes back to the early 80s when China provided the CSS-2, a ballistic missile to Saudi Arabia, subsequently to Pakistan, and with North Korea. So the complex linkage I refer to, and it's not in the public domain, which is why perhaps, you know, you may not have been able to refer to it. But in the strategic community, this is the received wisdom, that China had supported Pakistan's nuclear program, North Korea's missile program, and allowed or enabled a linkage between the three of them. That was my limited point.
All right. Well, one thing we are sure, at least for now, is that until unless, of course, North Korea places all bets off and goes ahead with that nuclear missile test, then of course we wonder what's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see. But until then, seems to be that this tug of war or what we're calling shadow boxing, this brinkmanship perhaps will continue. Thank you to all of you for joining me on this debate. We'll continue, of course, tracking this story very, very closely here on Rajya Sabha TV. But that's all the time we have at the moment on The Big Picture. Thank you so much for joining us.